We're going to commence this segment of the program with our keynote speaker. If I could have your attention, please. Thank you. Again, I'm Andy Wahlberger with SPIRE, and it's my pleasure to introduce these two gentlemen who are both Stanford alumni. The first is Matt Moran, who will be our interviewer for this keynote. In your program, you should have received an insert that has Matt Moran's bio. Craig Blanchard of the Stanford Management Company was out of town and unavailable. Matt is the co-founder and co-owns FJM Investments, formerly the Chief Investment Officer of Cornerstone, and is currently a director of Hudson Pacific. And Matt was integral into the startup of SPIRE and has been great a supporter of our organization. Eli Khouri is also a member of the Stanford Real Estate Council and is currently the Executive Vice President and Chief Investment Officer of Kilroy, where he handles investment activities, acquisitions, development, redevelopment, and dispositions. For a decade, Eli served in Speaker Properties and at one point was the Chief Investment Officer and was part of the team that was involved in the Speaker merger into equity office properties. Mr. Khouri was also the co-founder of Broadreach Capital Partners and has a extensive experience in the real estate industry. Eli received his Bachelor of Science degree in Civil Engineering here at Stanford, and without further ado, I'll turn it over to Matt and Eli and appreciate their time today.
Thank you, Andy, and thank you for your stewardship of SPIRE. It's great to be back on Stanford campus. It's been 30 years for me and 32 years for Eli since we've been on the campus, and a lot of things have changed on the campus. New football stadium, a football team that's actually good. My hairline's changed quite a bit since I was here, and I also need these. But Eli and I hung around a lot at Stanford, and we never talked about anything like we're going to talk about right now. So we're going to talk about the evolving workplace and the forces driving the trends in office use. What are those trends? How does this translate into actual bricks and mortar and the impacts of these trends for successful office development and investment? So when you look back at San Francisco, 1980, the companies you saw, B of A, Wells Fargo, Chevron, Alcoa, the standard big office users. You look around San Francisco today and you see those same companies, but in much shrunk down versions. And then you see Twitter, Yelp, Zynga, Square, Salesforce, Zipcar, Uber. And we're going to be talking about what those tenants primarily looking for, but also the impacts on the traditional tenants and how kind of the millennium, baby boomer, post-World War II generation is going to be kind of sharing the same kind of office space. So, Eli.
And by the way, Matt is being very modest about the football team. He was almost a 5-year player, protecting John Elway for all those years. On to his great pro career and represents Stanford well, and Matt was a fantastic football player in his own right and a great student as well. He really stood for what Stanford student-athlete really meant at that time, and he's modest as well, but and Matt's a great friend, and we spend a lot of time and love talking about this kind of stuff now versus what we did in college. But yeah, Matt's right. We're going to talk about what's driving it, what are the forces driving it, what are the trends that those forces are driving, and then we're going to drill down into that level, and then we're going to talk about, well, what does that mean? How do you create a successful real estate platform based on this information? And that last panel was fantastic. It touches on all the issues that we're going to have to deal with. We're going to try to not double cover that, but there is some overlap where a lot of this really intersects with the different phenomena going on that are real, that are here to stay for a very long time, and we better learn how to navigate them because they're going, if we want to be successful in real estate and successful in having great jobs and in improving our communities. So, with that, let's talk about what is driving. Did that change? Yeah. What are the driving forces? And first and foremost, it is the millennials. It's the millennials in number, and it's the millennials in the way they approach work and they approach life. I think the other thing is what is the United States doing well? Well, it's not doing a lot of things well, but one thing it is doing well is competing internationally in innovative and creative product and content in the world. here on the West Coast, in the major metros, whether it's entertainment content in Los Angeles and other places, whether it's technology innovation here in the Bay Area, whether it's biotech innovation in a lot of places, whether it's Boston, San Diego, Bay Area, Seattle. Seattle's a big participant in the tech environment. And we are competing on that level, and that's where the jobs are gravitating. It really is the evolution of what America provides, going from the financial services business to the information business. And so that's a big force driving thing, the competition for talent to make that part of the business work. I think we're also learning a lot about how the workplace can facilitate people being more effective. I like to say that we've reached this point where we used to mold people into the work environment that we provided for them. Now we're molding the work environment to provide for the way people really work and function best. And that's an evolution, and what we're going to show you today is a good evolution of that, but it will continue. We have to learn, be curious, be scientists, continue to make it better. And, so that's sort of the backdrop. And when we talk about the millennials, and Matt knows a lot of, we both do. A lot of them work for us, and we'll both talk about that. But I think it's important to...
Our kids.
What's that?
My kids now.
Yeah. And I skipped this slide, so if you want to look at it for a second, I'm just going to move on to the millennials because I talked to pretty much all of these. But people talk about the millennials, and for a long time I go, I want to understand the numbers. I want to understand exactly what they mean. And there's a lot there. But, this is really it. It's that cohort where it starts. You can see, that these people were born from 78 to 95. There's the front end there, that steep curve going up, peaking at about age 23 right now. Well, those numbers increasing, that's why it was so dang hard for that group of kids to get in school. The number of applications was going up every single solitary year, really tough, and that's the kind of impacts it's going to have all the way through. And if you think about this cohort going through, it's going to be going through, it's going to be driving things in our society, in the way we use real estate, and many other things. It's another 30 years before they really start hitting retirement age. And as they go through and, talk about having children and hitting that age, and when they have children and do their lifestyles change, while there's a bunch of them that are already of workforce age, if you take the ones that are under 30, there's only about 20 million that are over 30. And so there's still, and you really, by the time you're 30, you really get a lot. That's when you're really starting to hit your stride in the workforce. So we've got another 50 million of these to really start hitting their stride in the workforce. So the impact is massive, and it's going to continue to be something that we should understand how it's going to affect things going forward. And the other dimension about it is, how are they different than the last generation? I think Matt has a lot of anecdotes, and we can share some anecdotes on that.
Well, a number of my good friends have children that just recently graduated from college, and they live in San Francisco. And one of my friends I was just talking to, his son commutes, gets on a bus in San Francisco, commutes down to the train station, takes a train for an hour down to Silicon Valley, gets in his car and drives 30 minutes to his job in Silicon Valley. That's not what he chooses to do, and he says the next job I'm going to get is going to be in San Francisco, but there's challenges with that. You're seeing even now that the jobs housing imbalance in San Francisco is dramatic. They talked about it in the earlier panel. Eli, how can we work with what the millennials want, which is to be in that kind of urban, exciting environment, and also be able to provide housing and the creative office space that they want to be in?
Well, it's going to be hard. All the planners talked about, and this is the overlap. I'll tell you, the places that there's a few places that are getting it right and a lot of places that aren't. And I think the places that get it right are going to win. And frankly, as tough as San Francisco is, they're getting it righter than anybody. They're working on getting more and more housing there. Not just low-income housing so that they can keep their whole population, but housing that serves the millennials, high-density multifamily, and all of that. Other places that are really making it work that I see around the country. You look up in Seattle, there's a couple places where they're just doing a fantastic. Bellevue, Washington was ahead of the curve by a ton because they created density. They have high-rise buildings, they have high-rise apartments, condominiums, street retail. So it's like a mini urban village. It's pedestrian friendly. Microsoft's there, Expedia's there, all the tech companies are there, Facebook, everybody's up there because people want to live there. It's got the right workforce, it's got the right environment. You know, in the Bay Area, there's very few places getting it right. I see a place emerging getting it right now is Redwood City. So they're creating density at their Caltrain station. And it's going to work really well. They're putting apartments, they've got the entertainment, the retail. I think all the peninsula cities should really think about creating real density at their transit stations because the transit drives so much of this. I think, I think this generation is going to overcome a lot of the hurdles about living in denser environments. Some of them, when they have children, are going to move out to the suburbs, no question, but I think a lower proportion of them will. And I think, it's almost going to be sheer force of they're going to do it, and their numbers and their intent are going to create the environment that makes it happen.
When I was with William Wilson Associates in the 90s, we built the Oracle campus, and Larry Ellison, we heard it earlier, talked about wanting his employees never to leave. They put fitness facilities and dry cleaners, and it wasn't a cafeteria, it was the entire marketplace, and you see that trend continue with the new campuses. Google, and if you've seen the new Facebook campus, I mean, it's amazing what they've been able to do with the old Sun Quinton. As far as sprucing it up and making it feel kind of cross the urban-suburban feel. Eli, what kind of bricks and mortars change do you see in San Francisco, especially in that South of Market area where you are limited by how many square feet you can build and what you can build? Do you see any potential of, again, combining uses, or what are the trends there as far as the space that those people want, and how can those companies continue to grow? Or are they going to have to leave and go down into the suburbs and create these kind of massive urban campuses?
Yeah, well, it will be an evolution. As much as everybody up here talked about what we'd like to make happen in city planning and all of this, frankly, most of it's happened organically by its own force, the natural market forces, creating the demand in different places. But the trends that it's driving are in the location of the buildings, in these urban settings, and within those urban settings, for example, the preferences within those urban settings of the right environment, like SoMa over the old traditional financial district, is driving a change in the types of buildings that are being used. They're more horizontal than vertical because it's easier to move around and collaborate in there. The buildings are more inviting, they're more human scale. It's not like the Wall Street building that's big and cold and granite and intimidating. They're inviting. It's the human scale. And and then the other thing that's going on, and I should keep these slides moving forward because they actually help illustrate the points I'm trying to make, but is because of denser environments, because of cost considerations on all those things, the environments are getting a lot denser. And so we've gone down from, back in the 70s to 600 feet per person down to, 100 to 150 feet per person. We're sharing spaces. It actually works if you do it right, but I think we're sort of hitting a limit, and there is some pushback, and we can talk about, what makes the space work and what doesn't make it work. But, we'll talk a little bit, Matt, about, the San Francisco example, and then maybe we'll compare that to an example like the Apple campus or the suburban campus, because I think let's see if I can, at Kilroy, one of the things we've got, shorthand for it, we talk about the circle and the square, and the circle is the overall setting around the buildings, and frankly, the setting around the buildings is part of the work environment. You don't go into work, and then you're in your work environment, and then you go out of your building, and the whole neighborhood is the work environment. You're going and you're working at a cafe, you're going and meeting somebody for lunch, you're working over lunch, you're going to common areas of the buildings, and you want all of this stuff. People are biking, they're walking, they're not getting in their cars. And then the physical assets, as I said, are much different. They have to be, there's a lot of obsolescence out there, a lot of obsolescence. You have to be able to support high density. You need to be able to provide a lot of natural light. You need to have the whole building be usable. You can't just have the interior tenant spaces be usable. People are looking for environmentally friendly, clean, sustainable buildings, bike parking, all of those different things. And it's frankly a way of life. And I think San Francisco is the quintessential collaborative environment, by the whole neighborhood that's been created. But as I said, there are others, like Bellevue, that's happening in Hollywood right now. It's kind of coming back and creating a great pedestrian environment. And I don't know, Matt.
Why won't these tenants, the rents now in South of Market are actually higher than they are in the old traditional financial district. Why won't they cross market into the true financial district, the North Financial District?
Yeah, I think there's three reasons. It all comes down to attracting the talent and where they want to be. And one of the reasons they want to be there, first of all, is the transit infrastructure south of Market is a whole lot better. No matter how you get there, getting to south of Market's a heck of a lot easier than getting to north of Market. I think the other thing is the product that's down in south of Market over north of Market. I mean, again, we're talking about more of a horizontal layout and kind of spilling yourself out all over the building and all over the streets in terms of your work style. You go to north of Market, and a lot of the buildings, while they were good for their time in financial service, they're vertical, they're smaller floor plates, 15, 20,000 square feet, whereas some of the buildings south of Market are 30, 40. We've got a 60,000 square foot building south of Market that we can lay out very nicely horizontally. But you talk about a high-rise building with a center core, steel construction, fireproofing and all of that. They don't really lend themselves to opening it up in the collaborative environment and creating those dynamic spaces. And we'll go through some of what really comprises a great dynamic space there. But I think that, the transit, the types of buildings that are over there and the neighborhood make it a lot harder.
So the bricks and mortar, I mean, if you have a steel deck building with, sprayed on fireproofing, you're not going to be able to open that up for a tenant to have the high ceilings they want, that kind of look. Is it just the traditional B of A look is not what they're not going to go into the B of A no matter what you can do with the space? Is that kind of what's happening with these new tenants?
It is what's happening, whether because of constraints on space, they'll make compromises and continue to go up there. If they could have their druthers, they'd be in great space south of Market. If they start making compromises, maybe they go to Silicon Valley, maybe they go to north of Market, maybe they go to Austin. There's going to be outlets. It's not like people are going to run out of options, and just more core functions will be in those prime space and more core employees.
What are the things that these tenants are looking for in the bricks and mortar of a building?
Well, tell you what, do you mind if I just kind of hit the setting here again? I talked about why San Francisco really does represent, I think, the pinnacle of what you can do and how you can create this environment, and why San Francisco is absolutely here to stay as a tech market and an employment center and all of that, because it's really come of age. And by the way, I think Mayor Lee is doing a fantastic job of attracting employers and trying to find that balance, because the absolute rational answer is, if you want to provide all the services that San Francisco wants to provide, you have to have good quality jobs and employees up there. And he understands that. It's probably not in his, to his benefit to have somebody in real estate say, I think he's doing a good job, but he knows what he's doing. He knows where he's going, what he's trying to create, and there are obstacles in the population and all of that. But if you look here, the transit situation is fantastic. Between all the freeways drop in here, Muni, Caltrain, BART, the new Transbay terminal will handle 40 million people, bringing Caltrain into the middle of the city. All that's going to be great. You have the retail, restaurants, all of those kinds of things. You have the housing, you have the lodging. And what that creates, and this is very important to mention, is this business clustering. And when you talk about collaboration, there are many levels of collaboration. And there's collaboration within a company, and we'll talk about what that means. There's collaboration between companies. There are a lot of these businesses that are complementary to each other. They need this piece of technology to make their technology work, and having these companies around them works, very well. And so this clustering starts to happen. It becomes a very virtuous cycle. And that is what has happened in San Francisco, and that's what's happening in places like, Bellevue, Washington, and South Lake Union in Washington, and some peninsula cities are doing very well. And by the way, I think the traditional valley is going to be absolutely fine, and it's going to remain. It's going to remain a center of innovation. But, it's complementary, in my view, to what's going on in San Francisco.
The engineers that want to be in this market are here because of the fungibility of their jobs. I mean, this is an argument that we had back in the 90s, is Silicon Valley going to kind of strangle itself to death by not being able to have engineers afford to live here? And I think what we find is that the engineering pay just keeps on going up, and instead of acquisitions, they're calling, they basically buy companies now to hire the engineers. They don't care about the IP product, they just want to get their hands on the engineers. So I think, from South of Market to Silicon Valley, the reason they're here and not in Austin or not in Colorado, I know Scott McNeely's trying to start his new companies in Colorado. I think that's just a protest against California, but is because they have fungibility of their jobs. If they all of a sudden don't like the product they're being told to work on, they can just kind of move down the street. And they have a lot of different opportunities here. So.
Yeah, and you ask about what physically that translates into the space, and I thought I'd kind of contrast it to what it isn't first. And I saw that somebody put this video clip together. I go, you know what? That's pretty useful. Let's look at it. So, we talk about what's happening today is not your father's office.
How'd it go? Get back to work.
So that was your father's office. So you saw the physical surroundings, and by the way, that's a TV show, as you well know, and so those physical improvements were probably a lot better than average for the time, the way they're represented there, but they would be abysmal in today's market, even in the way they're represented there. The most interesting dynamic to me in that little clip is you had the young guy going, "Hey, how did it go?" And the guy go, "Get back to work. The old guys are in charge." But that was the young guy with the energy and probably the guy with the idea. Now we value the young guy, the young woman, the young person with the energy and the ideas. It's actually, this thing is starting to be centered around them, and it's centered around them for good reason, because they are the ones with the ideas. It's becoming more of a meritocracy. That's why the buildings are becoming more people-friendly, because it's inviting to everybody. Anybody who has a good idea can contribute. And so it's, your father's office was very hierarchical, was very closed off. Today's office is not. And so there's a lot of things going on inside these offices physically, and you have to get all of these dimensions right for it to actually be good collaborative space. And it starts with putting it in the right place, in that right circle. But we're down to the square now and talking about the square. I'll just go through, is it okay if I go through half of these? And we're talking about people put a lot of attention into how do we get people to bump into each other. We call it collaborative collisions. Sit there and talk. You look at these places where people might gather and talk. Somebody might join in. Somebody might go and they're working on the board. And, by the way, did you see X, Y, or Z? So, and they think about it. The architects, the designers think about that stuff. All sorts of collaborative areas where people can take on different types of activities. One-on-one, small meetings, bigger meetings, all of those kinds of things.
Is this killing the standard conference room, Eli, or is, you hear the trends, people are doing stand-up meetings so that they get what they need done. Are you finding less and less conference rooms and more collaborative space like this?
Yeah, I think you see a big variety, and it's before you had, 2 conference rooms, you had like a 6-person conference room and a 15 to 20 person conference room, and that's what you had. And now you have all kinds of let's get together, let's stand up. Look, I like the, let's see, on the meeting, on the one before, where they're kind of standing in a passageway thinking about it, and people might come through and go, contribute, or they might sit in this setting here, or there's just any number of ways that people kind of interact with each other. You need to provide the total package, they have social areas, time for a little bit of relaxation or play. People need time alone. They need quiet places. That's one of the complaints about these is you're working at the benches and there's a lot going on right around you. Well, you've got to provide some outlet for that. You provide that outlet in a lot of places. Some areas for solitude. If you look, I'll get to some other places where they do that, but natural light is honestly, it's critical. We're basically animals. We're biological creatures. We operate on daylight and nighttime and sunshine and natural light. And natural light is full of content that artificial light isn't, and it's essential to high function and to normal function to have access to, your biorhythms and all that, and that's scientifically demonstrated. Open space and volume, it's, particularly in the creative and the innovative businesses. I mean, there's a study for everything. Well, there's a study that says people create better in high spaces and they do detailed work better in low ceiling spaces. I'll let you look up the study if you don't believe it, and every study has, I'm sure you can find a contrary one, but there is thought going into this, and as I said, there is evolution, and we'll learn more, and some of this will have been wrong and some will have been right. Appealing visual content, just a stimulating work environment, I think stimulates a high quality of work. Your quality surroundings stimulates quality output, and that's important. Outdoor areas, I mean, these are 3 of our buildings. This is a roof deck where you can see the ballpark and the whole city and the bay, and people use it like crazy. Our new building we're building on the lower right there has another roof deck, similar situation. This is a plaza at one of our buildings that we completely revamped, so it was very friendly, and it's just an extension of the workplace. It's very invigorating, very attractive to having people want to work in your building, to being productive, all of those kinds of things. And usable common areas, like I said, they use the whole building. I mean, this is a great room in one of our buildings, and this is, just a basic pass-through lobby, but you see people in there working all the time or meeting all the time. And so, let's got to go back there. So it's about providing the total package, because you hear people complaining about some collaborative workspace, because some people think collaborative workspace is paint some bright colors and put everybody at benches and you're done. Well, if you do that, you're going to fail. You have to know the whole package. You have to think it through from top to bottom. You have to work with your tenants, your users, to really understand the particulars of their business and of their work groups and all of the. It's a scientific endeavor, and very few people get the whole package right, from the macro environment to the immediate environment to the square of the building to the interior of the building. And I think the successful people are going to have to get that right. And look, working with the cities for them to understand what's right and all of that is a big part of that. But you ask what the physicality is about, and in my view, that gets most of it.
What about, are we still tinkering at the right balance between personal space and this collaborative space? I mean, and the traditional office space is continually shrinking, where you got a private space, close your door, and it's your space. Is there continually tinkering with that balance, and then what are the cost implications for a real estate developer owner on creating these new spaces?
Yeah, well, there's several cost implications. So, going to your first question, are we tinkering? Yes, we are tinkering, and we'll continue to tinker. I'm tinkering with my mic. With getting it right, because I don't think any of this is, I think that's one of the fun parts of being a professional, is continuing to master this and make it better and better, and have the desire and curiosity to learn things and get better. And I know that I love it, I know that you like it, and all the people that are fun in the industry. Steve Dostart likes that, and he does a great job at it, and there's many others here, and by omission, I'm not excluding anybody. So no, I don't think we've got it completely figured out, and having an open mind, and you can't, I think you have to be careful not to fall into, getting into the group think, oh, it's collaborative space and that's going to be it. You always have to question yourself. Now, the cost implications for the landlord, if this continues, are good in a way once you get the space set up, because it is quite open and it becomes more like apartments in my view, and office buildings used to be highly capital intensive, where whenever you moved a tenant, it was a multi-tenant situation. You move walls and ceilings and zones and everything. It was just a mess to move a tenant. And now really what you do is it's almost an open canvas, and you move it out. The tenant moves their furniture in, or maybe they keep the previous furniture and they reconfigure it in some slight way. But it's a much lower CapEx once you get it configured correctly, if this phenomenon continues. And if you look at the duration of millennials, and you look at other businesses besides, the technology and the creative businesses kind of incorporating this work style, because for many people it is better, then you think is a trend that continues. And I think ultimately it's a good financial proposition for both the tenant, because that cost has got to go somewhere, whether it goes into the rent or whether, it goes out of the landlord's profits, or whether, it goes away from the tax base or whatever. And you asked one more question, and I forgot what it was.
That was you talked about the cost of building these creative spaces, and are they reusable? Basically, that was my question. And I think they do have a lot of functionality for the new types of tenants that are going to occupy these spaces south of Market. And so I think the financial dynamic for real estate investors is, and it used to be, you used to take, oh my gosh, we had a tenant called Surf Monkey. I'm pretty sure they don't exist anymore. And we created this big open space down at the Prune Yard in Campbell, and we had to totally redo it, and we put the old offices back in. Now this was in early 2000s, but I think that the new trend is that people want this open space, and the offices. I think the offices are going to continue to shrink, and I think that the functionality of the space will ultimately save in rollover costs, because you're going to have the one thing we didn't really address is these tenants are going to all grow and shrink, and so it's not like a big suburban campus, a Google or Oracle or Facebook, where they can manage their needs. These guys are going to have to move out of buildings, and you're going to have to release some of the space. And one of the things we didn't talk about is the credit concerns about some of this, the new kind of fangled tenants.
Yeah, well, Matt and I were talking about it earlier. I think, that was more of an issue during the dot-com. There is still some issue of that right now. But frankly, in our buildings that we're building this kind of space, we're getting mature companies that are profitable, that are using this kind of space. And even the big guys are using it. I just can name every name in the tech business that's big, or starting with Google, and they're using this kind of space. So we're very focused at our company on having appropriate credit quality for the space and the quality that we're using. I think that
Probably need to open up to questions here soon, don't we, Annie?
Well, yeah. I think we probably want to cover one other dimension here, which is, a lot of people have talked about the campus, and there was a sidebar on the Apple campus, and I wanted to talk about the Apple campus here just a little bit and the concept behind it. And again, we're talking about collaborative collisions, and I read about the concept behind it, and it's kind of funny. We call it the circle. Well, our square is their circle, and vice versa. But their concept is to get people in to this campus and create a huge number of high-energy collaborative collisions. I think what's going to make a difference for them when they get into this environment is, are they communicating and taking inputs and collaborating with the rest of the world where they are, or are they kind of cloistering themselves off? And their history has been that they do collaborate with the rest of the world, although they'll go get some technology, they'll use it for a while, and then they'll bring it in-house. But I think the real key on whether this works for a big company like this is, do they keep up really good communication outside of their campus? And the other thing this reminded me of is, some people are familiar, there's the Large Collider over in Europe, the particle collider. It's called LHC, or Large Hadron Collider, where they just get the circle and it creates high energy, and they're really trying to create these high energy collisions and learn, make new discoveries. And I think there is a metaphor there with that I really like, and I think Apple has thought it through. I'm not going to sit here and say today that I think Apple can't figure out how to turn out the best product and what kind of environment they should be in. I mean, being in San Francisco is great, or being in these overall environments is great, but I think there's a place for both ultimately. And I think it's a matter, I don't know, Matt, and we talked about this, and you talked about Oracle, it's a matter of scale. If you have the scale and you can provide enough of it, then you can probably get away with it.
A lot of flexibility. They have a lot of flexibility. I think there's a lot of flexibility in this, and they're going to have ancillary buildings around this major, circle building. But I think it's kind of different. Whatever we think, it's one of a kind.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. And I like to be open-minded. I don't think I have the answer. I'll be curious to see how it works out. Just two more quick things. We're talking about a business model that works, and I like this quote. I came across it, and every time you go on Forbes, they give you some stupid quote. I got this off of that, nothing original. But it is about, if you're going to have a successful investment model, for us, we feel like we've got customers, or the people who use our buildings. Well, if we're really fantastic at helping them put together space that makes their businesses work better, that's a real value creation for them. And if we're creating value for them, then we're ultimately creating value for our shareholders. And that's a successful investment model. We have to make the economics of all of that work. But the very fact that we can create value by being on the forefront of this, understanding it better than anybody else, understanding it better than our tenants, is really important to us. And And so, you have to get it right. And we've tried to move it from where leasing and real estate is a financial transaction to where it is a true value proposition for the tenants. And so we're going to have a little bit of time for questions. What I'm going to do is show a quick video here that, in my view, shows, that brings all these concepts together. It's a marketing video for a building that we're about to build in San Francisco. And I'll just go through that real quickly, then we can have some questions. So I think that's an example of what we're trying to say, bringing all those elements together. I understand we're running a little bit late, so we have time for one question, a real question. If anybody has any, we're happy to try to address it. Okay, hello. You're my generation, so.
In considering the collaborative approach, how far do you go with it? In other words, multiple tenants in the same space, or selecting tenants to occupy the same space that might well be collaborative in their enterprises?
Yeah, I think, you're talking about an incubator there where you can have different people sharing the same space, and there are people who specialize on that, and it works. It's not something that we do, although, for example, we have certain buildings that tend to create a certain type of tenant, like 363rd in San Francisco. We had started out with Comcast in there. Then we got Pac-12 networks. Now we have NBC. We have Major League Baseball where they run their replay center from there, and it's become a real media and advertising building, and we have AKQA. And so you kind of find these people, they do like to congregate together, and so we've got this great building made up of media and entertainment and advertising. But we don't do even though I think it works really well, we don't do that particular collaboration where, incubator space.
Thank you. I wanted to, Eli spent quite a bit of time preparing this, and I appreciate it. Kilroy is one of the most prolific developers in the Bay Area. We wanted to give you a perspective of what their strategy is, how they're reacting to the market, and appreciate his time and Matt. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you.